The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Wednesday, September 5th, and you are listening to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Ben is out this week. He is hosting the David Pakman Show, so I'm filling in. I am Matt Sinkowitz, and we've got Ben over at the David Pakman Show, so we took David's producer, Max Inhofe, and brought him in for this show. Max, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Ben is not hosting, but he will be present on the show today. We're going to start off the program with Ben's take on the Colin Kaepernick Nike campaign and the discourse surrounding that. I think that the feed would be remiss if we didn't include that, and certainly Ben's the guy to speak to it. After that, we're going to bring in our recurring segment, What Blogs Are Saying with Josh Moss. We'll do a little Woodward talk about the book and the phone call and all the stuff that was going on today. And then after that, we're going to have an interview with Ken Klippenstein from the Young Turks, from the investigative side of the Young Turks, and learn both about his craft as well as some of the stuff he's covering in the Middle East these days. So without further ado, let's cut straight over to Ben talking about Colin Kaepernick.
I want to start with Nike making Colin Kaepernick the face of their new ad. We'll pull the image up on your screen now. And on that, on this new ad, this says this: believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, just do it. Now, as you can imagine, conservatives have already started to lose their mind. And before we revel in all of them burning their Nike apparel, let's get a few details about this deal. So apparently this is a superstar deal where he gets roughly $1 million or more a year plus royalties. And this is a significant deal because Nike has been supporting Colin Kaepernick since 2011, all the way through this process. Now, what makes this deal important and even bigger is that it places Colin Kaepernick in even more direct competition and confrontation with the NFL as well as President Trump. It's almost as if Nike is giving him an even larger platform than he already had. And by them supporting him, it really puts a bind on the NFL. Now, the situation with the NFL taking a knee and the potential collusion that took place between NFL owners to keep Colin Kaepernick out of off the football field has taken a turn. Last week, a judge ruled that the case could continue. And so now this is like 2 weeks in a row where there has been a lot of negative information, negative results for the NFL, and Colin Kaepernick appears to be winning in several different ways. That being the case, I want to read a quote here from the New York Times, and this is what they had to say about it. They said, quote, Nike will produce new Kaepernick apparel, including shoe and a T-shirt. And if the merchandise sells well, the value of the deal will rival those of other top NFL players, according to the people close to the negotiations who spoke under the conditions of anonymity because Nike had not formally announced it. Nike will also donate money to Kaepernick's, quote, Know Your Rights campaign. Now, this is an important factor in this. Anyone who knows anything about Nike understands Nike's history with sweatshops and child labor and unsavory business practices, both here in the United States, but particularly across the globe. And this is bringing a lot of attention to the reality of corporations co-opting movements, social movements, co-opting the radical voices that are speaking out against political and economic power. Ultimately, it's an example of what we on the left would say capitalism co-opting a movement. This is capitalism protecting itself. But But underneath this, you have to take a note of what Colin Kaepernick is doing with his wealth. Colin Kaepernick has donated millions of dollars to activists locally who are fighting against police brutality, systemic injustices, et cetera, et cetera. And so Colin Kaepernick is taking this money from Nike as in addition to living his life, because, I mean, chances are we all had to be wondering how he's surviving. He's not getting a check anymore. He wasn't in the league long enough to be set up forever. Most players take a long time to get enough wealth to be able to walk away from the league. And many players don't ever make enough because of their spending habits. But the point is that Colin Kaepernick needed this. He needed this in this revenue, this income to survive. But in addition to survival, Kaepernick uses this money for good. So, I mean, there's a lot of conversations about whether or not we should be happy about this. I'm indifferent towards Nike. But what I will say is that I'm all for Colin Kaepernick using his wealth the way that he uses it, which is to, one, speak out against power, speak truth to power, and then to fund local activists who are actually on the ground doing the work. Now, something positive like this will not happen without conservative backlash. And I want to read you a couple of tweets from conservatives who lost their minds. The first one here on Twitter says this: "First, the NFL forces me to choose between my favorite sport and my country. I choose country. Then Nike forces me to choose between my favorite shoes and my country." So when did the American flag and the national anthem become offensive? Now, I wanted to read you that tweet from someone who seems to be just a random Twitter user because he shared video with it. Take a look at this video here.
I'm going to enjoy. Hell, I might buy some Adidas. You know how many other sneakers there are to buy, to choose from? And you're going to go ahead and say, hey, buy them our shoes. We stand with people who kneel for the national anthem. Well, sorry, Nike. I've been buying you for the past 20 plus years. Not anymore. Not only am I burning my favorite pair of Nikes, you are burning your sales. Have a good day.
I mean, it's ridiculous. People make these scenes, and obviously they're publicity stunts. They want attention, and so they burn their apparel. They did this when LeBron James left the Cleveland Cavaliers, and that trend never ended. But the reality of it is that Nike doesn't care about the handful of people. They've already made the calculation. This is a business decision for Nike. They have already calculated the cost, how much they're going to lose from conservatives who are mad, and how much will they make up in terms of people who are like, Nike's doing something good with all of the products from their sweatshops, so maybe I'll go and buy some shoes. And we'll talk about that later. But the point is that this is a business decision by Nike. And so they know full well exactly about how many people they're going to lose. They know their demographic. They know their target demographic. They understand that they're going to lose X amount of dollars, but they're going to make up so much more, or else they would not have done this deal. I don't believe that Nike is doing anything out of the goodness of their heart. Let's dispense with that notion. Nike is not sacrificing anything in this deal. Nike is going to make money with this deal, and that's the point. The other point, obviously, is that Colin Kaepernick is going to make money with this deal, and he has demonstrated that he's going to continue to do good with the money that he makes. So, while conservatives are losing their mind, burning all of their apparel, the reality of it is Nike doesn't really care. But I want to read this from conservatives' favorite Black conservative voice these days, Candace Owens, on Twitter. This is what she had to say. She said, quote, "Congratulations to Adidas for a wonderful win in business today. They are proof that sometimes all you have to do is sit back and let your competitors shoot themselves in the foot. Hashtag 3Stripe Life at Adidas USA, and at Adidas _UK. No underscore there. Yeah, okay. If you say so. The only reason I read that, besides the silliness of it, is that, in my effort to find a conflict-free sneaker, Adidas was listed there, but Adidas was listed there as a more eco-friendly sneaker. And as I researched it, Adidas is there. And I know this is not Candace's perspective. I don't really care about her perspective, but just Adidas in general, and in my efforts to find conflict-free shoes that pay a living wage, there literally are no popular shoes on the market today that pay their workers a livable wage, including Adidas, but Adidas is listed as a more eco-friendly shoe. That was something fascinating that I saw this morning. So a lot of people, most of us in the United States, we are consumers of conflict goods. It's just what it is. And so, while people are lamenting this deal with Nike, and, where are you going to go? I guarantee you, most of you have Nike in your closets or in your jogging apparel or whatnot. But one more, of course, it would not be a complete day without Ben Shapiro chiming in. And this is what he had to say with regard to Colin Kaepernick's sacrifice. This is what he had to say. He said, quote, "Name the thing he sacrificed. He was benched before he protested. He's become far more celebrated and famous than his performance would justify. Now that he's got a lucrative ad contract, Ali sacrificed something Kaepernick didn't." Now, this comment is very important because it demonstrates to you exactly what conservatives have done through American history. They will, first of all, pit two black people against each other to try to make their point. But that's just the surface level. If you go one level deeper, they are always willing to lift up somebody after they're dead as the paragon of the way, as the quintessential example of how you should do it. Or how you should protest. Oh, you should do it like Dr. King did it. Well, we would see how Dr. King would do it today if you all didn't kill him. And it speaks to the whitewashing of their relationship, conservatives' relationship with people who protest power. They are always willing to say, oh, yeah, we definitely would have done it, like Ali. Ali really sacrificed something. But how many people actually think that Ben Shapiro would be on the side of a radical black Muslim, a radical black man who was Muslim, a part of the Nation of Islam? Ben Shapiro is lifting up Ali just to sandbag Colin Kaepernick, when in reality, he would not have been on either side. He hated them just the same. So it's just a standard ploy by conservatives to pit black people against each other, to pit revolutionaries against each other, to pit progressives against each other, knowing full well that there's no iteration of protest that any of us can do. I don't care if you're black, if you're white, if you're protesting political power, then there's no way that you could protest and have it approved by those people in power. Power will never approve of your protest. It doesn't matter if you kneel. It doesn't matter if you sit quietly in a sit-in. It doesn't matter if you are quiet in class and silent and refuse to speak. It doesn't matter if you're marching in the streets. It doesn't matter if you're standing in front of a building. There's no way that you can protest that will ever be approved of by this system. And no matter how they like to throw people from the past into the mix to say, oh, this is how Dr. King would do it, or this is how Muhammad Ali would do it, the fact of the matter is that they would have opposed them during their time the same way they oppose Colin Kaepernick right now.
What a blog saying, I don't really know. I'm pretty busy and I don't know where to go to find them. But Matt's going to ask his friend Josh, and Josh is going to tell you about blogs. What blogs are saying with Josh Moss. Also with Max Thunder.
I'm here with Max Thunder, and I am joined by Josh Moss. Josh, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm glad to be back.
And it wasn't funny, but yet something about it. It's been a while. Josh is here to tell us what blogs are saying. I'll go to the what blogs are saying mailbag to pull out a question. Let's see. We've got Nicholas from Los Angeles. He asks Josh Moss, "What are blogs saying?"
That's a good question. Wasn't expecting that. Well, really today, blogs have been talking about the Bob Woodward book and all the juicy details that have come from it.
And the phone call, too, right?
Yeah, but the phone call was just released to show that Trump did not interview for it. So he called up and, it revealed that Trump he doesn't know what's going on. He claimed that he never was contacted, and then Woodward had said he just contradicted Trump in a lot of ways. It was,
yeah.
I don't know. But
no,
it was
the
a
phone calls
strike, I think.
Before we get what the blogs are saying, the phone call, Max, have you heard the phone call?
I didn't.
Josh, have you heard the phone call?
No, I read the
right, because that's blogs don't have phone calls. It is really amazing. I mean, the whole time, basically Trump is just he is lying to the guy like directly, completely. Even like Kellyanne Conway actually comes on and says more or less that the president is lying to Woodward. She's like, yeah, I passed it to him. Like, he didn't, very clearly. And then Trump spends when he's not just denying the obvious truth that he was told about the book, he is just saying, like, to Woodward, I'm doing a great job, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, he thinks that's how, like...
So sad.
Well, no, this is great. I think he thinks Woodward's going to be like, I've got a scoop.
From a true Washington power player. I mean...
Woodward's going to be like, damn, I got to write a new book. I've got a scoop.
It's also reminiscent. It's reminiscent of the Omarosa tape where she recorded. She told him he was fired, and he was like, "They run a big operation here, Omarosa. I don't know what to tell you."
So
he said those words.
So what are blogs saying about the Woodward book?
Well, they're focusing on specific, like several incidences that are in the book. So one, there was the incident where Gary Cohn secretly removed a piece of paper from Trump's desk that he was about to sign that would have nullified our free trade deal with South Korea, and Trump just didn't know it was gone. And this was like a big victory for Cohn.
Well, did he ever know it was? Did he ever know it was there?
Well, I think the implication was he just signs things that are put on the desk. So there needs to be a paper watchman, and Cohn was like the paper watchman, and he was like removing like papers that he didn't want signed.
All right, we get this one. I know that you're going to bring up others. We need to go through this one on a couple of levels. So one, it's amazing that he is hiding things from the president. It's like if you have a son, like a child, and the child wants a cookie, you just have to like hide it enough times that they forget it exists, and then it doesn't exist, right? Like he doesn't. What's it called? Object permanence. It's like he took it away enough times. Like, oh, I guess it just I've forgotten that it exists. Two, this was about. Now, I've read this two ways. Maybe you can tell me what blogs are saying. Was this about South Korean free trade, or was it about security stuff? Both? Max says both.
I read it that it was maybe I assumed it was free trade because, remember, these are what blogs are saying. It was about free trade because it was Gary Cohn was in the room, so I assumed it was about...
right, but that's there's a little angle there. Maybe it's a little petty, but like, of course, that's the thing out of all this, like, but
well, I mean, he is a globalist, Matt.
He is a globalist, quote unquote, triple parentheses globalist. Yes.
Yes.
So blogs are saying that is ridiculous, comical.
Well, I think they're pointing at the ridiculousness of it, comical, and kind of scary that he is just signing papers without knowing what they say.
Well, that's true. I mean, I guess I was thinking the other way about how ridiculous it was to like hide something from him, like he would forget. But that does suggest that he is just whatever is on his desk.
Well, I think he got used to signing like fake papers for B-roll for The Apprentice, and now he just can't stop signing papers.
This is just like a great concept for like an 80s children's movie, right? Like this is how this is like he signs over the presidency to an 8-year-old or whatever. It's just whatever's in front of him.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, no, that's it's like a good conceit for a very simple child's story.
Okay.
All right, so there's Gary Cohn. What else is there?
Well, he apparently went up. He's not happy with Wilbur Ross, and went up to him and said, "I don't want you negotiating anymore. You're past your prime." That's another big what blogs are saying. I mean, one, because he is by definition past his prime, unless he is taking the juice. But also, Wilbur Ross is notably hated. You know, he's one of the more comical, evil capitalist figures that is in the team. So just even Trump just yelling at him is just kind of amusing, I think.
Yeah, I guess so. That one doesn't rate real high for me in terms of the either comedy or tragedy scale, but worth noting. What else you got?
Okay. Well, he really went after Sessions. He called him retarded and said that he couldn't be elected to a one board county seat in the South.
No, I think
it was dumb Southerner.
It was very confusing. I said he couldn't be like a one man country lawyer. It's the thing that sounds like it's a phrase, but I suspect it is not one.
Yeah, the quote is.
I'm trying to recreate the actual Trumpian phrase, which is difficult. I'll be honest, but
the actual quote is: "This guy is mentally retarded. He is this dumb Southerner. He couldn't even be a one-person country lawyer down in Alabama."
That's
which actually is not true. That's one of the few things he could do. He could be a lawyer.
Well,
that's one of
the only word in there that's operative is lawyer, right? Because he can clearly be one. He can clearly be a person. He's clearly in the country. So he's just, I don't know, whatever. It's not worth breaking down. There's an irony, right? Because he's using a very offensive term to describe Sessions' intelligence while offering utter nonsense. Not surprised. I mean, like, look, he's literally tweeting out, telling Sessions to not follow the law over the last whatever. I mean, this is not. All right, again, kind of amusing, sort of ironic, middle range for me in comedy. What else you got?
Well, I'm actually going to switch off from the Woodward stuff. There was another little what blogs are saying. There's a report came out from Hebrew University that the sperm count, they're worried about the future of the human race because the sperm count of the average man has halved since the 70s.
Cut in half.
Yeah.
What is the implication for that for the fertility rate, though? I mean, obviously that does not mean that you would have the fertility rate, or well, it could, but it's not clear that it does mean that.
I mean, they're just reporting, I think, on the science. I don't think they reported on that. It was just as pure scientists, they're saying, obviously, it's not looking good for the future of the species if that continues. If these trends continue, you know.
Yeah, it's right to break out the Disco Stew Simpsons reference. If that trend continues, it is definitely not good. So, are the blogs? Are the blogs just noting this? Or is there discussion of cause?
What blogs are saying is like you know, this is what we get, this is what we deserve. A lot of the banal, you know,
sort of misanthropic.
You know, we deserve, we deserve all this.
So, I mean, the two angles that come to mind would either be environmental, there might be some sort of like general the state of the world, and then physical condition, right? Obesity and that sort of thing. What are those things coming up in the blogs, or is it just generally if something bad happens to us?
Yeah, I mean, all of that. You know, what we eat, what we breathe. Not too many like leftovers style. Like maybe this is like Children of Men style. To me, that's the most likely, frankly.
The most likely is an angry God is taking it out on our sperm.
Or God was impressed with the plot of Children of Men or Leftovers and was like, I'd like to see this.
Huh? So you're saying God has pretentious tastes in film and television?
Yes.
I mean I got to be honest. Not even God could finish Leftovers season 2. It's like the God cannot create a rock too heavy for himself to lift, and he can also not watch all of Leftovers season 2. But omnipotence has its limits.
Blogs like season 2. Blogs love season 3. The people who still watch, the blogs that watch, love season 3.
Huh. All right. Well, like I said, I did not get there. Being that I am something, I mean, I'm a mere mortal. I certainly couldn't get through that. But I got a little off track here, Max.
Okay. Josh, what else?
All right, I'll pull it back. I just wanted to say one last thing. So obviously, back to Woodward stuff. Obviously, he's calling Woodward a liar and everything. I did several years ago watch. There was an episode of Jeopardy. It was like Washington Power Players Week, and it was Woodward and Thomas Friedman and Dana Perino, and they should have stuck with kids round questions, because they were getting basic American history questions wrong. They didn't know answers, and it was kind of like seeing it was almost like seeing David Halberstam not know there were 9 innings in a game. It was that bad. Like these people who
So it would translate. David Halberstam has written some very famous books about baseball, and so Josh pulled that out as though the average listener to a podcast would know.
Yeah,
I mean Halberstam's kind of famous, but his baseball work is not even his central.
Rick Lardner. I don't know who's the most famous baseball writer.
Who is the most famous baseball writer? Oh gosh, that like the average. George Will is probably the person who wrote a book about baseball that the most people would know.
If it turned out like George Will didn't know there were what on base percentage was, you'd be a little worried.
I got to be honest, Josh. I don't think our demo on this podcast is either big on George Will or baseball metrics. However, we get the point. The people who claim to be experts on particularly political stuff often do not know all that much about anything but the most direct stuff they talk about. Do you guys
have faith in Woodward's reporting, or do you think it's a chance this is inaccurate, or you have faith that it's real?
I have no reason to believe that anything he said somebody said is not what that person said. Are there maybe reasons to doubt whether or not the things that the people said reflect reality, either because they're twisting it or because they've misremembered it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, people probably talk to him for self-interested reasons to spin the narrative in ways that reflect positively towards them, or to give their recollection of events that look nicely upon them.
Yeah, I mean, that said, if the one quote that you didn't come to, Josh, was Kelly talking about he says this is crazy town, this is the worst job I've ever had. I mean, I guess there's two ways to read it. One is that was a bad day for him, and maybe he generally doesn't think that. Or two, he's a complete why wouldn't you quit that job, right? Why wouldn't? It's obviously important. It would seem like he looks really bad for not coming out about that, right?
I think there's always suspicion. I mean, these are quotes, and there's always suspicion on quotes that are so perfect. But I think it's hard to be suspicious, about when the Trump presidency has turned out to be so, in a ways, exactly how we thought it would go. In a way, in the worst ways, I don't think those quotes actually are strange.
In that people are playing their parts too precisely?
Well, it's just, in normal times, you would be very suspicious of any quote that sounds so precise.
I see. People
it's
being...
crazy town. It's my patriot... Yeah.
So, but that's you've got a meta suspicion. It gets a bit complicated. But yeah, I don't know if we're just inured, if there's just nothing that can be surprising, or if these are just people playing their exact parts, and that feels weird. It's just bad writing, right? It's too on that. I mean, it's bad writing, like the script, right? Back to, this is something less than. It's not quite. It doesn't have the nuance of Leftover Season 2, is what I'm trying to get at. All right, Josh. I think that you've talked us through some current events. I think that you have alienated enough people with obscure references, and you've done your job.
Dana, for what it's worth, Dana Perino, I think, won that episode of Jeopardy.
All right, thanks for joining us, Josh.
Okay.
And now we have the pleasure to bring onto the show Ken Klippenstein. Ken is an investigative reporter for the Young Turks, and he's coming to us from Madison, Wisconsin, one of my favorite cities. Thanks so much for joining us, Ken.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I want to get into some of the stuff you've been looking at recently in terms of the Middle East, but before that, just as somebody who's interested broadly in how media gets done, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what is the life of an investigative reporter these days. There's been a discourse of the demise of the art of investigative reporting. A lot of newspapers have been cutting that out, but here we have you working with the Young Turks and sort of a new media outlet, and you're coming up with new stories all the time. So how do you do your work?
The way it works for me isn't how it works for everyone, but the way I've done it is I'm on the phone all day, every day. That's my big thing. And especially being in Madison, I'm often interfacing with people either in Northern Virginia or D.C. or Maryland or somewhere in the area, especially when I'm doing national security stuff. That's where all the intelligence folks are. They have a term for it. They call it DMV, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. So that's where all the spooks hang out, and that's where I source a lot of the tips that I get. And then I try to corroborate them in the open record to whatever extent I can. Sometimes you can't do that, and you'll have to rely on anonymous sources. But just a hell of a lot of time on the phone, and that's actually the part of it that I really like. You get to meet a bunch of different people, most of them whose politics you don't necessarily agree with. But it's nice because there's a tendency. It's so easy to get into a bubble in the media and just be around people that you share a lot of views with, and it can be nice to have those challenged, if only to know how to defend them better.
How do you develop those sources, especially like you say, not being somebody who's in that DMV area? What's the process of developing the sources, getting people to trust you? Where do you find your tips?
Very aggressive use of the phone. This wouldn't have been possible even just 15 years ago. I'm not a huge proponent of internet utopianism, the idea that the internet's going to liberate us all necessarily, but it has made it easier for people like me to. I view it as a huge advantage. Some people say, "Why don't you go to New York? Why don't you go to D.C.? You're crazy." Well, the cost of living here is so low that you get a lot more freedom in terms of risks that you can take, stories you can pursue that. I might not do if I was in either of those places. Now, I'm not saying everyone should do it how I did, but it's sort of nice. And then you're outside of the bubble in a lot of ways, too. There's certainly, cons, but there are a lot of pros, too.
Just to clarify, so am I correct in understanding that, because the cost of living is more reasonable, because, maybe if there's a gap in your employment at some point early on or something like that, you can get through it in that space? Is that what you mean? You're able to take risks that if it didn't pay off, you could still survive?
Exactly. And even just the nature of long-term stories, you're sort of investing in something that there's going to be uncertain returns for, as opposed to the sort of aggregation that a lot of people do. And I don't think aggregation is necessarily bad. That can be good. But it's very clear if you were to aggregate a story or just kind of do something safe, you can have a pretty good idea when it's going to be ready. You can probably produce a lot of it. If you're doing more long-form stuff where you don't really know what the answer to your question is, it's pretty risky, and you don't know if you're going to have a week where there's just no big scoops for your editor, and they get kind of pissed at you. But I always say the biggest form of censorship in the West, particularly in the United States, is that it's really in terms of what they can prevent you from publishing, if anything, in the United States. But economics, I see it again and again and again. That's what makes it really hard for people to pursue the kinds of stories that they want to.
We had some. It broke up a little bit there, Max. Did you hear that also?
No.
It was all clean?
No, I didn't hear it.
Oh, it came out. Sorry about that, Ken. I don't know whose end that was on. Should I take it back a question?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay, Max?
What was the question?
Yeah, let me take it back. Hold on. I'm trying to.
Sure.
I kind of want to. I want to. Do we want to? We don't need to restart the whole thing. Should we reconnect, Max? Do you think?
No, it should be okay.
It should be okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's let us. I'm going to start with the clarifying question that I asked you again. About the long form storytelling, long form investment stuff. Is that okay, Ken?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to clarify the point that you made, what you're saying is that by living in a place where the cost of living is a bit lower, you can maybe take some risks if it takes longer to develop a story. If you're not able to pay something off quickly, you can still stay on it in a way that you might not if you were in one of these sort of coastal hotbeds of investigative reporting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's not for everyone. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone because you have to use the phone very aggressively, as I've said, and there's disadvantages. But one great thing is, it's so much cheaper. You're outside of the bubble that's sort of an ideological bubble as well. When it's cheaper, then there's just more space you have for pursuing stories that you don't really know always what the outcome is going to be, and that can be very stressful. A lot of people blame journalists. They say, "Oh, journalists are lazy. Why aren't they doing these things?" They're often responding to economic pressures. I always say censorship in the West, particularly the United States, is economic in nature. Not, the state is very restrained in terms of what it can prevent you from publishing, if anything. But in the U.S., what I see time and again is just needing to make rent being a major barrier to being able to pursue the kind of stories that people would ideally like to do.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think you're right. I think that it is something that goes often ignored, the material lives of journalists. Is there an origin story here? Was there a moment where you realized you could do this work remotely? That was there a particular story that kind of pushed you down this path, made you have a sense that this tactic could be a way to build a career?
I would say there were a lot of factors. I saw Glenn Greenwald's story about Snowden, and I was really struck by the public interest that triggered. And it's very rare to see that in media. Maybe I was naive to think that was something that could be replicated, because that had sort of been a story that people had been concerned about for a while. Experts had sort of reverse engineered an idea of what the kind of surveillance was that was happening. There were leaks coming out in drips and drabs. So there was definitely a bunch of stuff that preceded it, but seeing that and then seeing the public have a discussion about privacy, and really have the law try to catch up, or have our discussion of privacy catch up with the technology, which it hadn't at the time, it was really, that seemed really cool. So I'm nowhere near that, but that was something that got me really excited. But then also, I graduated from college. My senior year, it was Wall Street crashed, and it was just, along with that, a lot of ideological systems kind of collapsed too. I remember literally being in economics class, our professor who applied economics and how great tax cuts all stuff literally could not explain what was happening. Students were saying, so why is this doesn't fit with this model? Why is this happening? The teacher literally, I just remember her, she just shrugged. She says, I don't know. And so after that, I was kind of like, whoa, obviously there's a bunch of stuff we're not. I had always been sort of like, had a sense that things weren't like right, but that was really a catalyst for me to question things and be like, well, it seems like we're being misled in a lot of ways. Like, you have Alan Greenspan saying my model for the world, so to speak, was like wrong. So it's like that was just a a big culminating point where I was like wow, I need to figure out what's going on, because the authority figures in my life clearly aren't.
Max, how's that coming through?
It came through okay.
Okay. Sorry, we're having a little trouble with the connection here, but I think we got what we were getting there. So we'll just have to cut this little bit out. Also, Max, take it. So, how do new stories come to you? How do you find a story? How do you decide it's worth pursuing? What's the evolution like?
I read the news, but I have a very particular approach. I think in a lot of ways, unfortunately, the press, if you've ever watched kids play soccer, little kids, like a kiddie league, it's like a mob of kids around the ball, and there's no one on defense, there's no one here, there's no one there. It's just this huge thing to get and I see the ball is different in media at any given point. Sometimes it's, Trump said this thing, or Trump tweeted that insane thing, and I'm not even, I get why people get excited. I mean, Trump says crazy things. I'm not going to pretend that I don't kind of follow that stuff too, but I just think there's so much competition from, very well-funded outlets and a lot of redundant coverage that I'm just kind of thinking, like, what's the point of trying to look at that? So I try to look at things that are a little bit off of the beaten path. Still stuff that's relevant to people and things that people care about, but that might get overlooked. And the way I go about doing that, a lot of cold calls, just call total strangers that either different agencies have like retirement lists, whether it's like the State Department or the Defense Department. You just see someone retires. You know that they're not going to have the same stake in being quiet about something. And I always say the biggest boon in journalism is how badly bosses treat their employees. I get so many people willing to talk to me just because of how horrible their bosses and management and things were. I think a lot of them really do care about getting the truth out, but a big catalyzing force is their mistreatment in these institutions. So yeah, cold calls. Sometimes I get references from people that I know. But I don't know. It's really hard. You just got to try to talk to as many people as you can, and you never know who someone's going to know that they'll be able to put you in touch with.
So let's use that as a way to jump into the stories you've been writing about Yemen and Saudi Arabia. what brought you? I mean, you mentioned stories that are undercovered. I think that it's still the case that story is broadly the both the war itself and also American involvement. But how did you start approaching these stories that you've been writing over the past little while regarding the war and American involvement with Saudi Arabia?
Well, just saw the enormous human suffering. I mean, in real time, Americans often don't see what happens, but there's hundreds of there's biggest cholera epidemic perhaps in history. Hundreds of thousands of children are facing starvation. I was just, I don't want to sound corny, but I was just really floored and kind of heartbroken by how horrible the situation was. So I felt like someone ought to write about some of this stuff because there's just a paucity of it. There's some good reporting on it, but there's not nearly enough. So that was really what motivated me, the humanitarian crisis.
What's the process of using open information or what should be open information in terms of FOIA requests and that aspect of the investigative work?
I would say the chief challenge is finding out what exactly you want, because unfortunately we don't have it's called freedom of information. I think it should be called freedom to request. And you have to request something specific. So under the law, the Federal Freedom of Information Act law, they don't actually have to conduct any of their own research. You have to name a specific record, and then they go and get that record. Well, how do you know what the record is if the agency has classification schemes and everything? Then you got to get a leak. So that's like the biggest challenge, is like finding out what something is, what the thing is called and where it's located, and then you tell them to get it. At the federal level, it can take a long time, but at the local level, you can have amazing success. And I'm always encouraging reporters to use FOIA so there's the federal FOIA statute, but then there's different state. Each state has its own state level version of it, and you can get those back within days at the state level. And often the domain of the like say Illinois, and then the FBI, if depending on what the subject is, they might even overlap. And so why go through the federal one if you can get it from, say, like a state law enforcement agency or something? So yeah, there's a bit of a learning curve, but I find it's really helpful because once you have a document, there's no arguing with that. They can't say like what they might if you had an anonymous source. They'll say, "Oh, you made it up," or "Oh, the source is incredible." I mean, if you've got the record right there, there's not much room for debate. So that's what's really nice about it.
Now, with the stories you've been writing about Saudi Arabia, you've got some key findings. One is about training of pilots, I believe, is the core idea of the investigation. How did you come across this information? What was the specific approach to getting this? And I guess what do you think is the significance of the work that you've been doing on those stories?
A State Department source was upset about the war, as I should point out many people in government are. I don't think Americans realize like how split the government is internally on this particular conflict. Like it's probably less popular than I'm sure it's way less popular than Iraq was when we first went in there, and we all know how controversial that was. I meet hardly anyone who supports the war in Yemen. It doesn't mean that they have power to stop it, but it shows how few of likes to stand on the rationale for the conflict has. Anyway, so this person told me about the existence of the training. They were upset that the Defense Department, the Trump administration, was saying after a horrible, atrocity in which the Saudi-led coalition bombed a school bus and killed dozens of young children under age like 9 or something. There's just bloodied backpacks strewn everywhere. You can see photos of it online, in the wires, in the different newspapers. But this person was upset that as that happened, and the Trump administration saying, we don't support the Saudis unconditionally. We're going to stop we're going to hold them to the greatest standards. They're at the exact same time. They're searching for private contractors to train Saudi fighter pilots on U.S. soil. And if you look at the documents which I embedded in the story, they show not just that the U.S. Air Force, is looking for these contractors to train these Saudi fighter pilots, but they're looking to train them specifically in weapon systems. So you can't even, pretend and say, oh, maybe it's just shipping, maybe it's just logistics, maybe it's just they're being trained in F-15s, the weapon systems associated with them, so the missiles is kind of exactly the stuff that is time and time again hitting funerals, hitting school buses, hitting civilians, horrible civilian toll, and that's it's all right there in the document.
So this is somebody who was privy to it from the inside, who came to you with the story?
Not came to me, but yes, someone who knew about it.
And you also had a report regarding gifts, put it that way, sort of the cozy relationship between the administration and the Saudi regime. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's quite incredible. This all probably seems like ancient history now, but during the primary, Trump actually accused Saudi Arabia of being responsible for 9/11. He said he was talking about how horrible it was that Hillary Clinton's, the Clinton Foundation receiving money from the various Gulf regimes. And then now we have this, Trump wins. What's the first country he visits? Saudi Arabia. I should point out, that he jettisoned, all of American tradition. Every other president before him, as far as I recall, visited either Mexico or, neighboring Mexico or Canada. He was the first president to go to Riyadh as his first visit. And, I spoke with rights officials at the time, and they told me that, that very clearly is sending a signal to the Saudis and to the world that, we are fine with all of these horrible rights things that you're doing, because why else would we come there and have some big red carpet rolled out for, Trump's first visit. So it's kind of a weird contrast in terms of how he ran the campaign and how he's actually been governing, because, every president is very cozy with the Saudis, but I don't think there's been one in living memory that's been as much as President Trump. And really the story I found was a 3 or 4 requests to the State Department. There were some, ridiculously lavish gifts that Trump was given, and I just thought it was a funny, contrast to the claims he made about getting tough on the Gulf states during that campaign.
And it points to, I think, a major point of contention when we talk about this story, which is that, of course, it's right now you see these atrocities. You see, again, the school bus that was attacked, and all this is very difficult to look at. And that's all under Trump's watch, but of course this conflict did not erupt under Trump's watch, and Obama was certainly, his record on this is not clean by any stretch. Do you think that the things you've uncovered here suggest a fundamentally different approach to this conflict from the Trump administration? Is it more of the same? Is it different, but in maybe a way that's not as materially important as we might think? What's your perspective?
Well, the specific thing I found about the training I thought more conflicted with their, remonstrations about we're not going to, we're standing up to the Saudis, we're going to have standards now, we're not going to let them get away with this. I don't, so much is classified, I don't know how training works. I know we've done military exercises with them in the past. I couldn't find any public evidence of specifically training on U.S. soil. That seemed unique. But as you point out, the Obama administration, every other, U.S. Administration has been very close to the Saudis. That being said, it's an escalation beyond even that in this administration. You can see that in terms of the number of bombs being dropped, the drone strikes, the special forces being used. It was bad under Obama, and it's worse under Trump. That's how, in a sentence, that's how I would put it.
All right. Well, that is that's a hard thing to hear about, but great way of putting it and clarifying for us. Ken, thanks so much for joining us. How can people find you?
You can just find me on Twitter at Ken Klippenstein. I assume I'm the only one. Not many Klippensteins in the world. Or you can email me just kenneth.klippenstein at gmail.com, or check out my Facebook. I'm all over the socials, so just reach out if you have a story you need gotten out, or even just want to chat about any of the stuff I've written.
Thanks so much, Ken. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
All right, so that's going to do it for today's edition of the Benjamin Dixon Show. I guess we could thank Ben for being on his own show. Thank Ben and David Pakman for allowing us to pull over his remarks on the Colin Kaepernick situation. Thanks to Josh Moss, as always, for coming on and filling us in as to what blogs are saying, and thanks to Ken Klippenstein for rounding up the show with the interview segment. Max, how can people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at MaxMillionaire.
And you can find me at Media Studied. Send us a message. Let us know that you're listening. We'd love to hear from you. And we're actually going to be back on Thursday as well. So if you can't get enough of us, then you get to have a little more.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. Bye.